He was so drunk, he looked like a homeless person. You know what? I still think he's alive somewhere out there. I just hope his leg heals properly. We were in that car for about 30 minutes before we finally made it to the hospital. The doctor said he had no chance of survival. He had already lost a lot of blood and his brain had been starved of oxygen for too long. But then something strange happened. His eyes suddenly flickered open. They buried him too soon. The man who was supposed to be dead stood up from his coffin during his funeral. Yes, you heard that right. A man named Freddy was declared dead, but his nightmare had only just begun. It all started when Freddy went out for drinks with some friends one evening, but by the end of the night, he had drunk so much that nobody recognized him anymore. And the last thing he remembered was getting into a terrible car crash. When Freddy woke up, he realized he was lying in a forest surrounded by trees and bushes. He was completely naked except for his shoes, and to make matters worse, he couldn't move his legs. He thought to himself as he tried to get up. But when he did, he noticed something horrible. His right leg was bent at an unnatural angle. It was obvious that it was broken. Freddy screamed in pain and tried to stand up, but he immediately collapsed again. The pain was unbearable. He couldn't move. And to top it all off, he didn't know where he was or how he got there. At that moment, Freddy realized he needed help, so he started yelling for assistance. But unfortunately, nobody could hear him. He was completely alone in that forest. Just when Freddy felt like giving up, he saw something in the distance. It was a road. Even though Freddy was desperate to get out of that forest, his injured leg wouldn't let him. Every time he tried to crawl forward, the pain was excruciating. But somehow, he managed to pull himself together and slowly but surely, he made his way to the road. When he finally got there, Freddy's hopes were dashed. There wasn't a single car on that road. It seemed like he would be stuck in that forest forever. Then he spotted something. There was a house near the road, but it was dark inside. So Freddy didn't know if anyone was home. He stood up, even though it hurt like hell, and started walking towards the house. As he approached, he heard loud voices coming from the inside. Freddy hesitated for a moment, wondering if he should knock on the door or not. But then he decided that he had no other choice. If he didn't do something quickly, he might die from his injuries. So he knocked. A woman opened the door and her face lit up with a big smile. "Oh, hello there," she said to Freddy. "I was just finishing up dinner, but why don't you come in and join me?" Freddy knew that he couldn't refuse her offer, so he stepped inside and sat down at the table. The woman poured him a glass of water, and Freddy drank it in one gulp. Then he told her about his car accident and how he had been wandering around the forest for hours. The woman listened patiently, and when he finished his story, she said, "Don't worry, I'm sure your friends are looking for you. I'll call the police and they can take you back to your family." Freddy thanked her for her kindness and sat quietly while waiting for the police to arrive. However, the woman kept staring at him strangely, and it made him feel uneasy. After a few minutes, she said, "You know, you look a lot like my son, Jimmy. I mean, your hair is the same color and you're about the same age. And besides, Jimmy went out drinking tonight and hasn't come home yet." Freddy knew that she was just trying to be nice, but her words made him feel uncomfortable. He didn't want to be mistaken for someone else, especially not when he was in such a vulnerable state. The woman called the police and told them about the young man who had come to her house. Soon enough, 2 officers arrived and they asked Freddy a few questions about his identity and the car accident. He told them everything he remembered, but they weren't convinced. "You're sure you were just in an accident, right? Because this looks more like a drug overdose," one of the officers said to Freddy, examining his torn clothes and bruised body. Freddy knew that he couldn't convince them otherwise, so he stayed silent. He didn't want to argue with the police because he was sure that his friends would show up soon. But as the minutes passed by, he began to worry. Why hadn't anyone come for him yet? Where were his friends? Just when Freddy thought that things couldn't get any worse, the police officer said, "I'm sorry, but we're going to have to take you to the hospital for examination." Freddy knew that he didn't have a choice, so he let them put him in the ambulance. When the paramedics checked his vital signs, they told the officers, "He's still alive, but barely. Hurry up and bring him to the emergency room. Freddy was lying on a stretcher being pushed through the hospital doors when he heard one of the doctors say, "Two ladies already dead." Freddy couldn't believe his ears. He could still hear them talking about him. Apparently, he had been brought to the hospital without his shoes, and one of the doctors found his ID inside one of them. It turned out that Freddy had been drinking with his friends in a bar not too far away from where the accident had occurred. The doctor said, "I'm sorry, but he was already dead when he arrived here." Sometimes you find people who have been in accidents like this, but this case was hopeless. There was nothing we could do to save him. His heart had already stopped beating. After Freddy was pronounced dead, his body was taken away for an autopsy. His friends were informed about the accident and they rushed to the hospital to identify him. When they saw his lifeless body lying on the table, they couldn't believe they had lost one of their best friends, and they were devastated. Freddy's family was also notified, and they started making arrangements for his funeral. Everyone in town was shocked by the news of his sudden death. No one could understand why such a promising young man had been taken away from them. 2 days later, Freddy's funeral took place. His friends and family gathered together to say goodbye to him. They were all crying, and the atmosphere was heavy with grief. The priest spoke about Freddy's good qualities and how much of a positive impact he had made on everyone's lives. Then it was time for the coffin to be lowered into the grave. As the mourners stood there watching, they couldn't help but wonder what had caused such a tragic accident. Had Freddy been driving under the influence? Or was it just a random act of violence? No one knew the answer, and the mystery only added to their sadness. As the sun began to set, the crowd slowly dispersed. They had paid their respects to Freddy, and now they had to go home and try to piece their lives back together without him. That night, Freddy's friends met up at his favorite bar to share their memories of him. They talked about the good times they had spent together, and they reminisced about all the fun they had had. They laughed, they cried, and they drank to their friend's memory. They were grateful to have known him, and they would never forget the impact he had made on their lives. But what they didn't know was that Freddy wasn't really dead. He had faked his death to escape his life and start over somewhere new. Freddy had been unhappy with his life for quite some time. He felt like he had wasted his potential and he was tired of the same old routine. The car accident had given him a wake-up call, and he realized that he needed to make a change. So he made a plan. He would pretend to be dead, and when everyone thought he was buried, he would run away. Of course, it was a risky plan. But Freddy was desperate to start a new life. So when the autopsy showed that he was indeed dead, he allowed his body to be taken away for burial. But before they lowered him into the coffin, he took out his cell phone and recorded a video message. In it, he explained his plan and asked his friends not to tell anyone that he was alive. He didn't want to be found, at least not for a while. Then he put the phone back into his pocket and lay down in the coffin. As the lid was being lowered, he took a deep breath and closed his eyes. He hoped that his friends would respect his wishes and keep his secret. But as fate would have it, one of Freddy's friends couldn't hold back. He told everyone that Freddy was actually alive and had planned his own funeral. At first, everyone thought it was a crazy conspiracy theory. But when Freddy's body was exhumed and no trace of his remains were found, they started to believe him. The news of Freddy's disappearance spread like wildfire, and soon the entire town was looking for him. Freddy's friends were worried sick. They didn't know where he had gone or why he had done what he did. They had always been there for Freddy, and it broke their hearts to think that he would leave them behind without saying goodbye. Meanwhile, Freddy was enjoying his newfound freedom. He had left the town and started a new life somewhere else. He got a job, he rented an apartment, and he tried to put the past behind him. However, he knew that sooner or later he would have to face the consequences of his actions. He had lied to everyone he loved, and he knew that it would be hard to repair the damage. But for now, he was content with his new life. He was free from the expectations and obligations of his old life, and he was ready to start over. In the end, Freddy was found living under a false identity. He had managed to escape the town and start a new life, but it wasn't easy. He had to deal with the guilt of leaving his friends behind, and he knew that he would never be able to go back home. However, he was determined to make the best of his situation. He had a second chance at life, and he wasn't going to waste it.